I want to welcome Carol Bowman to the 2022 Reincarnation Symposium. As a disclosure, I want to let you know that I had a private session with Carol. I've done her training, and I love talking with her and feel like she's a friend as well as a teacher. So welcome today, and we're so happy to have you.
Thanks, Carol. It's good to be back.
Yeah. And I wanted to tap in a little bit for the people who do not know your story, how you got into this work, and also as you tell your story, I'd love for you to think about, did you feel during that process that you were being guided to a life's purpose?
No question about that. It was orchestrated so beautifully, which I'll tell you about because that really is part of the story. You know, how we all get there is part of the story.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, I think I had an epiphany when I was in college around 1970. I was 19. And I was sitting on a beach with some friends, and I just had this cosmic conscious illumination. I was sitting there and I realized we don't die. We're made of energy. This energy survives. Consciousness survives. I didn't really have the language for it at the time, but I had this sense of oneness, that I was part of the sand, part of the water, part of everything. And that changed my life. That moment completely changed my perceptions. And soon thereafter, I found the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which described my experience, and I became interested in Hinduism and Buddhism, but it was more a philosophical interest at that point. I didn't see really how there was any application to my everyday life. So fast forward from 1970 to the mid 80s, I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, which is relevant in some ways, since a lot of amazing things happened to me there during that period. But I started developing lung problems, pneumonia, pleurisy, bronchitis, which went into asthma. And I kept getting sicker and sicker each year. And I was really concerned. By 1987, I was very sick and had to send my two young children away to their grandparents so I could stay in bed and recover. And during that time, when I was in bed, I had a waking vision. And it just flashed before me. And I saw myself, and I knew it was me. I saw myself lying in bed as a man, and I was coughing and very sick. And I remember coughing up some blood, and I just knew, oh, I have consumption. And I felt I was dying. And the next minute, I saw myself above a scene looking down at what I knew was my funeral. There was a procession of horse and carriage going into a cemetery. And I saw one woman there who was crying, and I knew she was my sister. And after that vision, maybe it lasted 5 minutes. I don't even know. It was an out of time experience. And I knew it was me. And I thought, oh no, does that mean, is this some past life? Does this mean I might die young? He looked like he was in his 30s, and I was in my 30s at that point. And I got really scared. Yeah, it was very scary. And I sent my husband to the library to look for books on reincarnation because I wanted to see if anyone had written about this, what this vision was, what it meant. If I died at that age, would I die at that age again? And my husband came back empty-handed because in 1987, there wasn't much out there, especially in the public library. But anyway, within a few months, a friend who knew about my vision called me and said, there's this man Norman Ing, who's a hypnotherapist passing through Asheville, and he does past life therapy sessions. And without knowing what past life therapy was, I called him, signed up, and I did a 2-hour session with him. And this was in October of 87. And I saw that lifetime that I had seen in my vision. He did straight out hypnotherapy with me with this guided imagery and got me into this experience. Actually, it was very easy for me to regress. That was part of the joy of this, was I just went right to that life that I saw in my waking vision. And I saw that this man had died of consumption. And I saw I had some unfinished business from that life, some emotional business. I felt like I was not seen in that life. I was seen in a certain way, but not in the way I wanted to be seen, which was interesting. And from that, I started crying, and I said, I don't want to look at this. And this was in that hypnotic state, or that light trance state. I saw myself as a young mother. I knew I was in Vienna. I had 2 children. I knew my husband had been taken away by the Germans. This was World War II. And I saw that he was taken away first. My children were taken from me at what I believe was concentration camp.
Mm.
And after they were taken, I felt totally numb. And I could feel this as I was doing the regression. The emotions were very real. They were just coming out. I was crying. And I kept saying, I don't want to look at this. And Norman, who was very experienced with past life regression, said, it's okay. It's okay to look at it. And I saw that I had died in a gas chamber. And I went through the death. I looked down at all the bodies piled up, and just had a good cry. And I think I cried for, maybe a day or two after too. It was so emotional, but felt like such a relief after seeing that, because so many of my childhood behaviors and fears tied into that lifetime.
Wow.
And I had a couple recurring dreams when I was very young where I saw myself as that woman, and I didn't know, I had no context for what I had seen in the dreams. But after I did the regression, I knew that I had seen myself as that woman as a child. And I had a lot of fears about being born Jewish in this lifetime. And I remember at age 4 or 5, I remember where I was standing, I had a little dress on, and I remember knowing, beyond time, consciousness outside of time. I knew as a 4 or 5-year-old that if they found out I was Jewish, they'd kill me, which was totally out of place for my safe childhood environment in a small town. But it was very real, and it affected me throughout my life. So I finally understood why. Everything made sense after that. And what I noticed a few months later was that I hadn't gotten sick. Usually in the fall, this illness would come on, and I was fine. So I was kind of blown away by that, because I hadn't responded to any traditional medical treatment. So my medical doctor was so amazed. He wanted to do a regression, as well as a bunch of my friends in Asheville. So a year later, I invited Norman back to work with me again, and with my friends and my doctor. And this is what I mean about orchestration. This is way beyond me. In that interim between my first regression and Norman coming back a year later in the summer, my son Chase developed a very strange phobia. And we first noticed it at a 4th of July celebration in 1988. This was right before Norman came back to work with my friends. We were at a 4th of July celebration as soon as the fireworks began, as soon as those large booming sounds began. He became totally hysterical, so much so that I had to take him home and rock him in a rocking chair. He was 5 years old. He was a little one at that time. And I couldn't understand why he had a reaction to those loud noises, because we had actually been to fireworks before. And I couldn't think of anything he had been exposed to which would have caused that phobia or that reaction. But I wrote it off, as any parent might. I thought, oh, well, he had too much sugar. He was too excited because we had had a party that day. And then a few weeks later, it happened again when we went to an indoor swimming pool and people were diving on the diving board, making a big booming sound again as the reverberations hit the walls. And again, Chase became hysterical, and I had to take him out of the building, and I asked him what was wrong, and he said, those loud sounds scare me. So when Norman arrived, maybe it was a few weeks later, it was pretty close timing with all of this. He asked Chase, I asked him if he could give Chase some, just thinking he was a hypnotherapist, some post-hypnotic suggestion that the next time he heard those noises, he wouldn't get triggered. He wouldn't have that really strong hysterical reaction. Little did I know what was in store for us that day. But Norman, who was great with kids, said to Chase, would you like to get rid of your fear of loud noises? And he agreed, and I certainly agreed. And he said, sit on your mom's lap. As I said, he was a little guy at the time. Close your eyes and just tell me what you see when you hear those loud noises that frighten you. And I could see his eyelids fluttering. He was getting some visuals. And he said, I'm crouching behind a rock. I have a uniform on. I have a long gun with a sword at the end. There's smoke everywhere. I don't even know who I'm shooting at. And I was like, what? My first reaction is, what's going on here? And he went on to say he was shot in his right wrist. He pointed to his wrist. He said, they take me to a hospital, but it's not like a regular hospital. It's just these poles on the ground with something covering it. And they put me on a bed, but it's just a hard bench. And they bandage my wrist and they tell me I have to go back into battle. I don't want to go. I miss my wife and family.
Wow.
And that was the moment. I get goosebumps
Me
years
too.
later just telling the story.
I know. I love it.
Because in that moment, it was like going into mild shock. I knew we were in new territory. I had done my regression, but I didn't know children could have past life memories. But Norman picked up on it. He knew.
Yeah.
And when Chase said, I don't want to be there shooting other people, Norman said to him in very simple language, we live many different lifetimes on Earth, and we're like actors in a play. Sometimes we have to play these different roles, and sometimes we have to be soldiers and kill other people, and sometimes we are killed in battle, but there's no blame. And actually, I could feel Chase's body relaxing as Norman gave him those assurances. And I was just stunned, I was, just listening. And Chase said he had to go back into battle, and he described walking along a dusty road, and there were chickens on the road. And he said there's a wooden wagon with big wheels pulling a cannon. I didn't even know he knew what a cannon was. And drawn by horse, he said, the horse is pulling the wagon. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I was scanning in my mind, what war could this be? What time period are we in? And he said, they make me go behind the cannon. And then his eyes popped open. He was done. Whatever was happening, he was done. And he grabbed a cookie and went off to play with his Legos.
Oh my.
And my 9-year-old Sarah was sitting there with us watching this. And, I said, what was that? And I pretty much knew at that point it was some past life memory, but I just was stunned. And Norman was, reassuring me that, maybe this will help him. So within a few days, something very unexpected happened. He said he had been shot in his right wrist and he had gone to this field hospital to be bandaged. And with a few days, that eczema he had on that spot of his wrist since he was a baby that had not responded to medical treatment cleared up completely.
Beautiful.
So since I had had my own experience with a regression and I had a physical healing, which brought Norman back to Asheville, I knew that it was possible. And when Chase had it, after this 15-minute recollection, I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder how many other kids have these memories so close to the surface or have these phobias or a physical problem that can be healed through past life therapy. And it was interesting because Chase was just about to turn 6 and he asked for a drum set for his birthday. He was drumming on everything anyway, on pots and pans, little kid drums. And he became, his lifelong passion was drumming, making loud booming sounds all the time, which I thought was kind of hilarious. But that afternoon changed my life because I wanted to learn everything about, can other children have these memories and what are the implications for healing in other children? It wasn't just remembering these details he couldn't possibly know about. And there's a little more to that story because after we were at the point of moving from Asheville, at that point we moved to suburban Philadelphia where we live now. And when he had just turned 6, and we were sitting and having breakfast a few months after we got here. And just out of the blue, he said, remember when I was a soldier and I was telling Norman about that? And I said, yes. And I perked up because in the course of moving, with all the confusion, I kind of put that on the back burner. I really wasn't thinking about it that much. And he said, well, we talk differently. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I was a black soldier. And then he resumed eating his cereal. It was like this momentary flash. It's like, oh, okay. And I was trying to piece it together, again, time period, context. And interestingly, that day, there was a newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer had an article about the Black regiments in the Civil War.
Oh my goodness.
Chase didn't see that. He couldn't read at that point. But at that point, I looked at the newspaper. I said, that's very interesting that I am getting this article. Maybe he was in the Civil War. I don't know. But, life took over. And I started training with Roger Wolger in past life therapy. And a year later, going into 1981, when the Desert Storm War began, I picked up Chase. I think he was in 2nd grade at that point. And I picked him up at school and he was very upset. And I said, what's wrong? He said, my soldier memories are coming back up.
Oh.
They're putting ribbons all over the school, these yellow ribbons. And he said, they don't understand what war is. This is coming from my 7-year-old. He said, can we do another regression? And by that time I had trained with Roger, I had the basics down. And when we got home, I just said, lie down, close your eyes, and tell him, go back to the scenes you saw with Norman. And he was there, very easy for Chase to do. And this time he remembered his life before he went into the war. And he said, it's 1860 something. It's like, how would he know this? And he said he described his wife. She wore a kerchief in her hair, and he said she had petticoats. And I didn't even know he knew that word. It was kind of an archaic word. And he described his peaceful life, and he said that he signed up not knowing what it was going to be like. He said they had posters in his town to join up. And he said he was a free black man. So this is what consistent what he had said a year before when he was 6 about being a black soldier. And he said he went to war, and he went to the same scene he had seen before, remembered more detail. He said, you pull a string on the cannon just to fire it. And I thought, that's ridiculous. I've never heard of that, which turned out to be historically correct. And he remembered his death this time. He said he remembered being behind the cannon, and he remembered all of a sudden he was above the scene looking down at the smoke below on the battlefield. And he said he started talking as someone way beyond his years at that point. He said, everybody has to experience a war. It teaches you how other people feel. It's not a good place to be. And he said, I didn't have to come back to another war. I was up. Oh, okay. And I asked him if he had anything he felt he needed to do so he could move on. And this was a technique I had learned through Roger. When you go to the afterlife, which we all do, that's part of a regression session. And he didn't know anything about that. He didn't know about out-of-body experiences or anything, or near-death experiences. Hadn't read Raymond Moody, I like to say. And he said, I want to go say goodbye to my wife and children. And he said, his words kind of blew my mind. He said, when you're in spirit, you can travel around easily. And he said he traveled to look down on his family, and he said goodbye to them and knew that they would be okay.
Oh, wonderful.
So that seemed to finish it for him. And, I said in my book, I told Chase's story in my book because it was my seminal case, and he had the healing and, all the components were there, what a child's past life memory is. And I used to say, and his eczema went away on his wrist completely. But when he was a freshman in college, he came home one weekend, and he said, my eczema's back. And by that time, he was 18, just turned 18. And my first reaction was, oh no, I talked about this in lectures. I've written about it in my book, and saying the eczema went away and never came back. And I said, well, what's going on in your life, Chase? And he thought for a moment, and he said, I just had to register for the draft for student loans.
That is a great point.
So just the thought of being in the military again, brought up the somatic, the body memory, which I thought was really interesting.
That is an excellent point.
Yeah. So fast forward to Chase will be 40 in a few weeks. Well, around the time of the symposium, right around that time. And he has not had the eczema since age 18. So it was just the emotional memory of being a soldier that connected to the physical, which we find a lot in regression therapy, in any kind of therapy. There are emotional components. So that started me on my research. I had no idea other children had past life memories. It took me about 2 years to find out that there was someone who had been researching spontaneous past life memories in children at the University of Virginia, Ian Stevenson. And by that time, I had written a couple of articles, started getting cases. I had written an article for the Edgar Cayce Foundation Venture Inward magazine. So I figured that was a good audience, since they believe in reincarnation. And I started getting cases, and I started seeing patterns in these cases. So when I discovered Ian Stevenson's work through reading Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, Brian just mentioned Ian Stevenson and, like a few sentences about doing research at the University of Virginia. And I immediately tracked down his first book, 20 Cases of reincarnation and got it in the mail, and I was just floored that he had done such extensive research into this phenomenon. And he found a lot of the same patterns that I had, the age at which children remember, and when they have spontaneous memories. Chase's was kind of a hybrid because we gave him the opportunity to remember by connecting it to his feelings, which you can do with adults in regression therapy too. So what stood out for me was that Ian Stevenson found that about 35% of the children who remembered traumatic deaths, and most children who remember their past lives remember how they died, and most of those memories are of traumatic death. You know, a life cut short, life on a battlefield, life in an accident, where you're really leaving with unfinished business, or it's so intense that some of the feelings in the physical imprints remain. That a lot of the children who remember traumatic deaths, about 35%, it might even be more, I think, have phobias relating to the way they died.
Wow.
And the same pattern holds true for adults in regression therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 99% of my work is, and probably yours too, is with traumatic deaths, which leave the negative imprints. You know, we have positive lives, and some children have positive lives, and those memories, when a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old talk about, oh, when I was big before, or I used to have a farm, or I miss my wife, parents are less likely to really dwell on a positive memory and kind of write it off as fantasy. They dismiss it. But when a 2 or 3-year-old talks about dying in vivid detail and knows things that they couldn't possibly know, then you know you're in different territory. And 1997, my first book came out, and I wrote it for parents as the guide for parents, so they could help identify these memories in children, and take it to the next level with healing. And Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, his successor, have not addressed that, which kind of I find a little disturbing, but that's why I wrote the books too before, because no one had to address that in a book. You know, maybe in passing someone may have said something, but I felt it was so important because I saw these spontaneous memories as healing opportunities for children who are carrying trauma forward into this life. And since a lot of the kids remember their traumatic deaths, it's like they're screaming to be heard. You know, just they're very simple ways you can help them process the memories.
That, you know, I was going to ask you what made you choose regression therapy instead of the type of research that Ian Stevenson did, but you've already answered that question. You know, maybe as a mother, you were drawn to the healing, nurturing part of this work, but you really broke ground, though,
I
for
hope so.
children, you know, for parents to help their children who were remembering, to acknowledge children who are remembering, and then to develop the whole modality for therapy. You really were a groundbreaker in that. So I feel very much indebted for you. You helped my inner child. You helped me with my grandchildren when they were having their memories, and they could talk to me about it, but not their parents. So,
and that's a problem.
yeah.
You know, when yeah, that's why I think it's so important for people to know that this can happen, and that it's okay if they talk about it. You know, that, I mean, you can imagine how some people feel who are, you know, very religious perhaps, or you know, they think their child is possessed, or we don't talk about this, you know, this is crazy, there's something wrong with my child. And I think I wanted to normalize this. parents believe in reincarnation or not.
Yeah.
So in all cultures, it's happening. So yeah, I think my role was to educate parents, give them some tools to help identify the memories and help them process it. And I think when a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, and this is 3 is to be the optimal age for remembering, because the children have enough vocabulary to communicate. And a lot of 2, 3, and 4-year-olds talk about it. And if they're shut down, that I have found through working with adults, that those emotions really don't go anywhere. They can follow us throughout our lives.
Exactly. That's why I came to you, because I knew that somehow you could help me unlock those places that I had hidden from myself. And I could feel their impact on my adult life. So it's
Yeah.
wonderful. Wonderful.
And something else I learned from Ian, I learned a lot from Ian Stevenson, obviously. His work is impeccable, in my opinion. Very detailed case studies, addressing any kind of concern, could this be real? Are there other explanations? So when you read the cases, it's just amazing how much work he did. What was I going to say about that? I started saying something, but I lost my place about Ian. Anyway, we'll move on from. Sorry about that.
Just like you knew what your sole purpose is, I get the sense that he had a definite knowing about what his sole purpose was, even though as a psychiatrist, my first thought was, why wouldn't he think of this as a healing modality? And this is one of the reasons why we created the theme for this year, the art and science of regression therapy, because it is kind of a mixture of both. And you're a perfect example of that. As you've experienced now 30 some years of all of this, can you look back and know what your lessons that you were learning through your experience for your own past lives, your experience with Chase, or being the witness for any of these other lives that you've helped? What were the overriding lessons that you see in your life?
Well, there is some choice in how we reincarnate. Choice is not the best word. People say, I chose to reincarnate with this family, but I think it's the wrong word. Choice is the wrong word. It's a resonance. What I've learned is there's an energetic resonance with what we need to learn in the family we land in. Maybe not every time. I'm talking generally, not
Right.
there are going to be exceptions to any generalization. But yeah, for the most part, the reasons why we are born into particular families. And, if we really had choice, would we choose to be in difficult situations? No, of course not. So I think there's a resonance with what we're carrying into this life. And all this stuff, all of these emotions or physical characteristics, and I'm talking about those relating to past lives, not heredity. These are energetic imprints. And nobody really understands fully the mechanism, but we are energy, we die, that energy is encoded somehow. Maybe the trauma leaves an imprint, other things, maybe talents, abilities leave imprints. And it's transferred, it's from the soul out that we create. It's not the other way around. So there is some energetic resonance with what we need to learn or what we need to balance. There's always balance in this. And my feeling is that we are our own judges and juries too.
Absolutely.
And that really hit home with a case I had years ago with a woman who was terribly abused as a child. Very nice upper class Connecticut home, and it happens in the best homes. And she had done a lot of therapy by the time she got to me, but her question was, why? Why did I choose this family? Because it was so traumatic for her. Her mother knew what was going on and didn't protect her from the family members, which is common, as we know, unfortunately. And I can't even remember how we entered into this, but she had posed this question. And when she went into that state, went into this other lifetime, she saw herself with high black boots, cross belt. And she said, I'm SS, which, was really some of the worst of the worst in Nazism. And I guess he was ordering the execution of women, children, and she, as this soldier, had an epiphany at some point and said, wait a minute, we're killing all these people, all these innocent people. And this is wrong, and I deserve to be punished for what I've done. And the soldier did something on purpose to end his life. He disobeyed, he did something, and I can't remember what it was, but he was shot. And they would do that for people who were not following orders. And when she recalled this and left the body after the past life death, when he was killed, she said, I could feel the energy shift in the room. It was that profound. And she had a good cry. She understood that her soul had chosen to balance. She felt she deserved to be punished. He said that before he died, I deserve to be punished for what I did. So this was the balance.
Amazing.
When you hear, balancing the scales like an Egyptian cosmology, I think the soul does want to energetically balance things.
Oh, I believe that so much also, rather than the punishment and retribution that so many people talk about it. I think it's more about balancing.
That's a really important point too, Carol, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Landing on that, because, I think with their lives, like, I don't know what led to my Holocaust life, because it was so bad.
Yeah.
But, there's something, I haven't really uncovered that. But the point is, it was like, I knew it was a horrible life. And I knew that I had to experience that, to gain a level of empathy. That, it was so extreme. It was an extreme learning situation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we should do a session on that. I don't know if I ever told you that I also had a Holocaust memory, and I actually do remember the life prior to that set up my choosing the Holocaust. So we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, that's another conversation, but there is balance. And I think you made the point that it's not a punitive process, although we perceive it as, if we're victimized, of course it's punitive.
Yeah.
But in this wider scope of things, there's always this balance going on, which is profound. It's like, is it Shiva? It's like the creator, destroyer, yin yang, there's always that balance. We're trying to get this balance and awareness.
We could do a symposium on that one subject alone. I just love it.
Balance.
Yeah.
Karmic balance.
And that's one of the things I've been focused on, is trying to understand the system of reincarnation. And so that's how I came to the conclusion that it's more about balance. And you see these things over and over, and you experience the unbelievable compassion when they go into the life between life, that it's just so amazing.
And I that's so healing when you go through the past life death. I call it a virtual near death experience when you do it in regression therapy,
Yeah.
because you are going out of the body in a sense. Although
Yeah.
you're in the room, you have that perception. It's all perception. It's like you're going into that other dimension temporarily.
Right.
And I've worked with especially abused women, sexually abused women, when they go into that place, they have said, I've heard it so many times, this is the first time I felt safe and totally accepted and loved. That love, that energy there, you get that this is not punitive, because we always go back to source.
Right.
We can get stuck a little bit in the entrapments of the former life, the emotional entrapments, or the guilt, the regret, the anger, whatever it is, the emotions. And part of the work we do in past life therapy is to release those ties, when you can say, you don't need to carry that any longer.
Yeah.
It's done. And you get that on a soul level, it's done. And like this woman, she felt so much lighter after she saw this and understood that it was a choice, in a sense.
Yeah.
It was a balance. It was just so profound.
Very true. And as being one of your subjects, also clients, that I can attest to exactly what you're saying, because I came out of that a new person.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the
So
goal every time, right?
that's right. Being
Nothing.
reincarnated without having to die.
Yeah.
So I want to finish up by asking you a question about everything that you've learned in this field of regression therapy. What advice do you have for the next generation of regression therapists or people who might be interested in it?
Okay. I think this is something I've seen for years, and I think we've talked about this. It's really important to have client, as a therapist, to have the client experience the full emotions as much as possible, and keep directing the session to, what are you feeling? Where do you feel that in your body, to bring it into the embodied state, rather than, oh, if things get too heavy or too traumatic, just look at it as an observer. There are very few times when you really need to do that. And, there is that tendency to dissociate with trauma, or, this is like I kept saying in my first regression, I don't want to see this, because I knew it was horrible, but I did it. And, I had the cry, I had the catharsis. So that is really an important part of it, to allow the emotions to surface, not to hold back. And I always tell people, it's good to cry.
Yes.
And another important thing too, and this is a subtle thing, which I teach in the training, but it's so simple. But anybody who's doing past life therapy, when you're giving the initial instructions, before you actually do the regression, assure them that it will feel like you're just making this up initially. When you go into the past life experience, there is those moments of doubt where your mind will say, you're just making this up. And I felt that way the first time. And I still after doing this for so many years, when during the last regression sessions I did, it's like, you must be making this up. So there is that tendency to write it off, but you want to keep the people, it's okay to make it up. Just go with it, whatever's coming up. And I think that's really important. I know it's helped. Clients have commented that it's a good thing you told me that, because I felt like I was totally making it up.
Yeah, giving permission to make something up, just go with it.
Because we're not used to this level of awareness. So it's important to allow, like we were saying. I don't know, there's so many fine points to this too. It's such a broad field, but I think, really feeling the feelings in the regression is so important. Because
I so agree. And like I said, you've been so instrumental in your books, in your trainings and your talks. And I love how you're able to share so much more here because we're so very focused on, what is this reincarnation stuff all about? What is regression therapy all about? And I'm glad to be able to give you a platform where you can share in more detail. So,
And Carol, I really appreciate your efforts because no one else is doing this right now with the symposium format with
I'm,
different speakers.
you know,
So
it
thank
and
you.
it's actually something that happened in the training with you that sort of guided me there because I was in that in between life space and I called them the masters. They called me out for not doing everything that I was meant to do and just be open about it. And ever since then, I have just been very different in my approach. And so when I heard the inner call to do this symposium that was 4 years ago, it's like, I don't know why I need to do this, but I know I need to do this. So
Well, obviously you have good organizational skills too.
yeah, that helps. Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
just bringing people in your openness and the fact that you're an experienced past life therapist and you know the field. It makes it special because you bring out a lot of the finer points of this.
Oh, thank you. I feel like that does make a difference too, rather than people who are just curious about this field and don't really have a deeper appreciation from having experience healing, from having experience what it's like being working as a practitioner and witnessing people's healings and so thank you so much for that. That you've made my day. It makes
Good.
me know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing as we both are. And so thank you so much again. I look forward to when you do another training. I know you want to do it in person, and when you do, I'll be there to support that. So
Great. Yeah,
thank
well,
you.
thank you, Carol.
Thank you. I want to welcome Chase Bowman to the Reincarnation Symposium. Thank you for joining us and sharing your time and your perspectives 34 years after you had your experiences. I am so moved by rereading the book and about your experiences. And as a regression therapist, I had a lot of questions about what the after effects of remembering your past lives has been. So I'll start with this question to kind of warm you up a little bit. You mentioned in one of your memories that you talked funny in that other lifetime. And then that's when you discovered that you were a Black soldier in the Civil War. And I wondered what that felt like to you.
As a child, um, I mean, as a child, it was just it felt like any new experience. You're trying to just make sense of it with the limited logic and experience that you have. So it wasn't that it felt particularly surreal or abnormal. It was just like, okay, this is the reality that I'm processing. What is I can communicate this and do my best to process it. Um, it but I do remember, a frustration. Like I remember the feelings very well. Uh, and I think remembering a past life is much like remembering a dream in that the manifestation of it is less relevant to the feeling that you get from it. And I think that's very true when you remember past life. And so, for example, I remember the feeling of trying to read a poster but not being literate, not being able to figure out what the poster said, and being frustrated because other people could and I couldn't, and just knowing that it was important based on the reaction of people around me. Um, and so yeah, it's I think the situation was similar to peering into a conversation with adults. You know, when I'm at that age, I can't make sense of everything that's happening because I don't have the experience or the logic to do so yet. Um, but you know, I can tell when things are important or what the feeling in the room may be, and that was sort of what it was like observing that life. And also, I think because I don't think I was a very educated person in that life, so you know, I think there was a lot of confusion that I felt often, and that came to my experience in the battlefield, where I didn't really know why I was there, and I didn't really know what the point was, but I knew it wasn't fun. You know, I knew it wasn't a pleasant experience, and obviously, I was trying to make good by doing what I was told, but I didn't really have a lot of grounding or context for what was happening around me.
Right. I love that that perspective, because you felt it, and what I'm hearing is that you felt like there was some truth to this, even though as a child you might not be able to make sense of it. The way you spoke about your memories just seems sort of matter of fact and above your age at that time. And I love it when in 1991 and your mom regressed you because you were having another memory. And in that regression, you actually got to go into the afterlife. And for an 8-year-old to be able to talk about the afterlife so beautifully as you did back then, that must have been an awesome experience that has played a part on in your life.
Um, yeah, it certainly has. I mean, I think the whole experience has kind of the collective sum of the whole experience has played a great part in my life, just because it was, you know, it was normal. It was normalized. I mean, both through having the experience, you know, to have a reference of it that I could say was firsthand, and I felt confident in, you know, from what it was. I didn't feel like I was particularly coached or encouraged to say anything in particular. But then, you know, growing up in an environment where it was nurtured made it normalized as well. And that that normalization gave me a lot of confidence to kind of establish that as my spiritual beliefs very early in life, and that has led me a bit of freedom as I became an adult. You know, freedom to kind of, I guess, ask different questions or ask more questions, or kind of start from a certain foundation, and to some degree not feel the need to ask certain questions, because I felt okay. I kind of, you know, I feel like I have enough idea of what happens when we die, and enough context to know that this is a life of many, and um, enough context to see this life in the context of a couple others, such that I know that I chose certain circumstances of this life, and therefore it's important to live it and not worry so much about the rest. You know, I'm not so concerned about what happens after this. And to be honest, at this point, I'm not so concerned about what's happened before this. Um, I feel I saw as much as I really need to for now. And I think that's a theme in my life in terms of my spiritual beliefs is I feel like I have enough information. I don't feel I have all the answers by any means, but I feel I have enough to proceed as I need to and focus on other things to actually be more worldly than maybe I was in younger years.
Right. I love that what you said about being nurtured and supported. That's one of the things that I would like to get across to people, because so many more children are remembering. I have a case right now of two boys in one family who are remembering their past lives, and I can't wait for them to be able to see this symposium to get a sense of the value of being nurtured, being supported, and instead of suppressed. You know, so many children are suppressed, and you know, until Carol's book, people didn't know how to deal with that. So I love the fact that she's approached it from a therapeutic point of view rather than, you know, the way Ian Stevenson's approach about children's memories was very different. It has its place, its value, but as Carol and I both, agree that the therapeutic value then lays a foundation for a child to develop into their best, we believe. So I love that.
Yeah, I'll admit past lives are not a big part of my life at this point in my life, but I will never hesitate if, particularly, as a lot of my friends, become mothers and parents, I will never hesitate if they want to discuss it in regards to how it may affect their children, or if they're, in some cases, their children have started talking about memories. I will be very present and as encouraging as I can to, make sure that environment is nurturing. And if in some cases, I've even referred some of my friends to my mother to speak with, such that they can get the advice from someone who really knows. So I'm always supportive of any young child growing up in an environment where if that's coming up, they have parents that have some tools, or at least an awareness to not dismiss it.
That's wonderful. And that's the other reason why I'm happy to have you, because so many people in your age group may be facing this as well as parents. So knowing how to cope with what's happening without fear, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we have in life. And I love how you mentioned about that your experience has sort of made you fearless and open to take some risks that maybe you might not have taken had you not had that support.
I think that's very accurate. I think the support that I have is sort of my own faith in kind of my place in the context of someone who believes in past lives. The fact that this is one life, it's specific purpose. It's not going to, it's quick. It's the context that this is the blink of an eye, and if you zoom out far enough, and that is very encouraging when you think about taking risks. And I've based a lot of my life on taking risks, and a lot of the things I'm grateful for have been from those moments of leaping when the outcome wasn't as certain. Or for that matter, I mean, there's also the theme that it was a pretty bold thing to be 10 years old and to go on national TV and talk about your past lives. And in fact, I didn't really understand how unusual that was until very recently, where the context of it kind of hit me all at once. I was like, okay, that's not something that everyone believes, and to some people that's very strange. And I think that there was some challenges of doing that, we'll say, as a euphemism, but I think that gave me, while it was challenging at some moments growing up, I think it led me to allow myself to think outside the box. And it already put me in a different position than the people around me in some cases. And I think that allowed me to continue that thinking as I got older. I decided to homeschool my senior year of high school, as an example, which seemed like a radical decision to a lot of my friends, but it was actually totally the right decision for me, and something that led me to sort of an independent way of starting my professional life. And I could see there are a number of times where I was able to think for myself, because I've sort of took a path that was a bit unusual. I didn't, so it was definitely a blessing and a curse to be that, to say something that weird confidently at that age.
You did a beautiful job on the Oprah episode that you were mentioning, and you came across so mature, so beyond your age in that interview. And we actually start yours and your mom's talk with that interview. So
Oh, very cool.
we'll get to
Yeah.
see that, and then Carol will talk, and then we'll bookend it with your talk. And that brings me to another question about how it seems to me that you and Carol have had a soul agreement, we call it in our profession. Um, before coming into this incarnation, your paths seem to have just unfolded so beautifully. And when I see something like that, it shows me that you are both following a purpose, whether you realize it or not. And I wondered if you have had any awareness about that purpose.
Um, I mean, I agree. I think there was some negotiating, before I came in, that this is what we're going to do. Uh, so I mean, I feel that. I feel very strongly. I chose my parents, and I chose this time period for a number of reasons. Um, and everything's intertwined, right? It's a tapestry that we weave uh, between our parents and our friends and everyone we touch in our lives. Um, so I think, yeah, I kind of picture, before I came in chatting, being like, okay, we're going to do this. We're also going to do this, and we're going to do this. Like it was kind of like it was a multifaceted agreement that we had, as I imagine it. I'm going to help my mother with the research, which of course helps me in some ways. It makes me who I am. Everything's intertwined, and also, my parents were super encouraging in all the right ways that I needed for me to do what I want and think independently and nurture my creativity as it is so important to me now in my life. So I think it was like, hey, I'll help you. You guys take good care of me, and we'll call it a deal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and of course, I think there are other layers of us acting out past life things. My mother has seen me in other lives, and I've seen her. So of course, it's a much denser tapestry than as simple as I'm making it right now. But I think there's, in terms of the context of this life, I think that was kind of the agreement.
I think tapestry is a wonderful way to describe it. It's a beautiful metaphor. And, the other theme I can hear as I'm listening to your story is that you either came in or quickly remembered a sense of trust about the whole process. And I love how you're now using that trust with your profession and your life now.
Can you elaborate?
When you were talking about how taking a risk, and you were talking about how there was something that was guiding you. You may not have used those exact words, but just like, deciding on your own that in the 12th grade, you're going to do homeschool, when most kids in the 12th grade, they want to be around everybody, but something inside of you said, I'm doing homeschool. That takes a certain level of trust to be able to speak that truth and then step out into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's courage I gained from speaking an odd truth at a very early age, and kind of already being a bit of a misfit by that nature, and being willing to push that as far as I wanted to go to make my own rules as I got older. And there are a couple incidences where I did big jumps like that. I, was living in Los Angeles, and at one point I decided just to become a nomad for 3 years and just travel the world, working in the film industry as a freelancer, but going from job to job, and then in between just kind of going wherever I wanted in the world. And it was a great time of just finding an alternative path that worked for me, and that led me to a really falling in love with Prague, where I live now, and just a really beautiful time in my life.
Wonderful. I also love another lifetime that you talked about, not in the book, but in conversations we've had, about the shaman, who you said he was the sort of the warm-up act for the medicine man. And tell us a little bit about that lifetime, what you remember of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because it was entirely spontaneous. It kind of came to me from sitting on the beach. Actually, it came to me in a couple parts, but it was all sort of spontaneous. It wasn't through hypnosis or any kind of process. Um, and it came out in sort of response to, as I've matured and explored my creativity in different ways and sort of had some self-awareness about my role as an artist or as a collaborator. And it was interesting. Yeah, it was my job. What I saw in that life was I was in some tribe. I have no idea when, but clearly a remote tribe. And my job was in the mornings to walk around and listen to what was the way it was. I called it in that life, in whatever language, was the song of the day. And so I would, listen to the jungle, and I would hear uh, sort of a melody or a rhythm of that day. And then it was my job in the evening, as after dinner, when the tribe started, I guess it was a daily, nightly ritual, I would lead a group of drummers to, in some relation to that song, and bring the tribe to a state to allow the medicine man of the tribe to take over. So I was this vital, I was not a lead role, but I was a vital supporting role, and sort of um, and also performative for that matter, in raising the consciousness of the tribe. And it all kind of came to me. Well, it came to me at once, and then got little details out from it later. And it was really interesting in the context of my life, because my creative role has often been supportive. I've played the drums in many bands, which is a fundamental but supporting role. And as a filmmaker, I'm a cinematographer, which is another fundamental supporting role that you could relate very much to the drummer in a band. You're not the lead singer, you're not the director who, gets is on the front of the stage, but you are the mechanics that make the machine go in both cases. And I've thought that was really interesting, and it brought me a lot of peace in some way, but also I think was a bit of a challenge to see if the lead role was something for me in this life. And that's something that I've thought about often and continue to think about as as my uh, as my creative adventures go into different phases. So it was, I think it was like a reminder why I'm comfortable in this position, also why I'm sort of at heart a performer, uh, and also it presented a challenge. It didn't say you had. It wasn't like I have to be the lead role in this life. I don't have to be the medicine man in this life. But it was like you can try it if you want to. It's you have the room for it if you want to, and it's up to me whether I want to take that or not.
Yeah, so many choices. And I love that perspective too, because what you're showing us is the steps along the way, and the freedom of will to choose. And I think people sometimes take for granted how important those supportive roles are.
I agree. And it was a very happy life. Like it was, in that life, I was not jealous of the medicine man. I didn't aspire to take his role. I felt entirely blessed and at peace to have this responsibility. And I took it very seriously, uh, in terms of like, this is my duty to the tribe. Um, yeah. And I felt like I think it was a bit of a privileged role. And I think I knew that. It wasn't, I'm sure there were a lot less inspired, roles in that tribe, but I had this one and this was the one I was tasked with. So I felt very fortunate to have that role. And that's something that I feel now is, I mean, working as a cinematographer is an amazing job. And I love every day I'm on set. And it's not lost to me, that same feeling of like, wow, people appreciate my aesthetic and my ability to manage a crew well enough that they keep hiring me to do this. That's amazing. So I think that same feeling of gratitude for where I've landed has been carried over. And it's still, and actually I have started to direct in the last couple of years, and it's actually been awesome experience to take the lead role. And so I'm considering that in other aspects, maybe this is time to experiment with being the medicine man in this life.
I saw the videos on your website and they're mind-blowing. They're really well done and beautiful. So
thank you.
I love that you're using your gift. And that for me, even though I did not begin remembering in depth my past lives until much later, I feel like by remembering them, they have helped me live in the present. And that's another aspect I'm hearing about your life. Live in the present, and also to do what I feel like I'm meant to do.
Very much so. I think that's a good summary of where I've landed with it. It's not something I think about that often anymore, because I want to be here and I want to be grounded and present with what I'm doing the best I can. So I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you have a new project coming up. I don't know if you're ready to talk about it at all. Carol was telling me that you have something going on with audio, visual, that will be sort of revolutionary.
Well, mothers. No, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I just think it's funny how she's like, it's going to be revolutionary.
She's excited
that's
about
lovely.
it.
Yeah, that's lovely for her to say. I'm just, well, yeah, I'm doing a project that I am very excited about. I've been doing it for about 5 years, and that's working with augmented reality, which, to qualify it, is not virtual reality. It's not pass-through augmented reality. It's the idea that you put a headset on, you see the natural world, and 3D objects are added to it. And I make that distinction because I think it is a very underlooked and under-evolved and very nascent realm of interacting with digital technology that's going to be a complete game changer. And I think everyone's sort of distracted with virtual reality right now, which I think is a bit of a false flag. But for me, basically, my mantra is that I want to remind people of magical powers they've always had. And I think this is actually the absolute peak medium to do that. And I've created software that basically uses a sorcery metaphor to control real world lights. There's a lot more I could say about that, but it's a really exciting project, and I think just very aligned with who I am and what I want to do. It is it's the closest feeling to having magical powers that I've ever had, and I'm happy to share this step by step with the world. And actually, in a couple hours, I have a group of about 10 people coming over who are sort of self-proclaimed wizards in Prague, whom have been using my technology at festivals to create immersive experiences for guests. And there's a bit of a community building here around it, which I'm happy to nurture and host, because I'm so excited to see this start to become a thing.
I can't wait to hear more about that. That sounds awesome. It sounds a little bit like what I experience when I journey. And it's so real, so very real to me that it almost feels like when I come back that I'm in a virtual reality now where the other feels more real to me.
And this is, yeah, and I'm not a fan of virtual reality as it is to be fully immersed. I don't think anyone wants to spend more than a couple minutes in that. I think it has its uses and its moments, and there's some great games and experiences that can be had. But I think what's more exciting to me is to be um, completely present in this reality, and have magical powers be given to you, um, to the best that technology allows. And
Yeah.
that's what excites me is truly, and we're discovering gestures and modes of the interface that feel like it is remembering something. Um, we called it, when we find something like that, we call it an as it ever was, aspect of our interface.
As it
And
ever was. I love that.
and it's sort of like a grading for the level of design for a feature. And it's really amazing because it is about hand motion and hand gesture and interacting with hands. I mean, just the simplest version is you basically conjure color between your hands and then you cast it out by turning your hands out towards the light. And it is that simple and it works that well. And the more that we kind of tap into these, as it ever was, as we call them, the more the interface kind of comes alive and starts to realize itself. So we're on this fun path of both inventing and discovering at the same time, and couldn't be more excited with how it's starting to gain some traction.
Wonderful. Well, as I said, I can't wait to hear more about that down the road. It sounds like you've got a lot of doors opening, and I want to wish you all the best for that. So I know you've got to get ready for that meeting, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us and share your perspectives 30 some years later, and how your life is moving along now. This is a beautiful story to be continued.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carol. I appreciate it.